Today's video is sponsored and is based on an article originally written on The Athletic. For the best ad-free baseball coverage, head to theathletic.com/Dawson Wright to get The Athletic for only $1 a month.
This is going to be a tough play. Bryant, the Cubs win the World Series! The Cubs have finally won it all!
The Cubs' run to their 2016 World Series championship was memorable to say the least. It was a payoff following years of rebuilding and over a century of playoff disappointment. Once the lovable losers, the Cubs were now a powerhouse organization from the top down, headed by one of the best minds in baseball in Theo Epstein and possible future Hall of Fame manager Joe Madden. The Cubs' young core still had room to grow following their World Series win. Yet, here we are 4 years later, and the Cubs have left a lot to be desired. Following their failure to make the playoffs last year and a first-round playoff exit against the Miami Marlins this year, the Cubs are headed for another transitional offseason as their young core gets closer to being pulled apart. But before we get into what's next for the Cubs, we need to take a look back at how we got to where we are today, and how an organization that had so much promise for the future reached their peak before they even knew it. Back in 2011, the Cubs were stuck without a direction. They had a roster filled with overpaid veterans that had nowhere near the production they had in their primes, and they finished at the bottom of the NL Central. Things got so bad that the Cubs decided to fire GM Jim Hendry before the 2011 trade deadline, and interim manager Mike Quaid was out as well. That offseason, Cubs chairman Tom Ricketts was looking to shake up the organization, and he decided to bring in the man that does it better than anyone else in Theo Epstein. Epstein was coming off his tenure with the Red Sox, where he built the team that won the World Series for the first time in 86 years in 2004 and another in 2007. He had a vision for what the future of the Cubs could be, and he got started right away. Epstein wanted to build a foundation to keep success by making the Cubs a drafting and development powerhouse. His strategy was to load up the farm by acquiring young position players mostly through the draft, and then figure out the pitching as they go. In the development system, they already had 2011 first-rounder Javier Baez and international signing Wilson Contreras. And in their first offseason, Epstein and new GM Jed Hoyer traded for struggling top first base prospect Anthony Rizzo. For the draft, Epstein and Hoyer stuck to their strategy. With their first 4 first-round picks they had in the draft, the Cubs selected only position players. In 2012, they selected outfielder Albert Almora Jr. In 2013, they selected third baseman Kris Bryant, second overall. In 2014, they selected catcher Kyle Schwarber. And in 2015, they selected outfielder Ian Happ. Following their draft success, the Cubs farm system went from being average on a good day to being the best in baseball in just a few years. The system not only had depth, but it also had the impact prospects it lacked before, like Kris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, and Gleyber Torres. However, this still didn't translate to success for the big league club. Even with the emergence of Anthony Rizzo, 2014 resulted in the 5th straight season the Cubs finished in last place in the NL Central. The team was constantly underperforming, and the coaching staff saw 3 managerial changes in only 4 seasons. The Cubs knew that for this team to reach its World Series aspirations, they would need an experienced manager to lead them there. So, they decided to give Joe Madden a call. Joe Madden is known for being one of the more bizarre managers in MLB history. While his style is certainly odd, with the right team there is no doubt that he produces results. As soon as the Cubs learned that Madden was going to be leaving Tampa Bay, they jumped at the opportunity and signed him to a 5-year deal. With Madden now at the helm, the Cubs were ready to turn their performance around, and that's exactly what they did. 2015 was the first time in a while that we saw the Cubs as a legitimate contender. Free agent signing John Lester made an immediate impact, performing well at the top of the rotation. Coming off a career year, Jake Arrieta did even better, winning the Cy Young. Kyle Schwarber came up and started eating fastballs for breakfast. And of course, we saw the arrival of Kris Bryant. While Bryant wasn't there at the start of the season for some service time manipulation, his production became crucial to the middle of the Cubs' order, and he took home NL Rookie of the Year because of it. Under Joe Madden, the Cubs really started to mesh, winning 97 games in a packed NL Central and reaching the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. While the Cubs would fall short in the 2015 playoffs, losing to a Mets team in the NLCS who in contrast built their young core around pitching, the Cubs got a lot farther than anyone expected, and it was clear that this was just the beginning for them. Gearing up for the 2016 season, Theo Epstein still had some issues on the roster that needed to be resolved. Starlin Castro was sent off to the Yankees to decrowd the middle infield, veteran starter John Lackey was signed after missing out on David Price, but the Cubs still decided to bring in another top free agent in outfielder Jason Hayward, signing him to a massive 8-year, $184 million deal, which we will get into later. With significantly improved roster depth and it being the second full year of Joe Madden's tenure, expectations were high for the Cubs heading into 2016. Even with some key injuries to guys like Kyle Schwarber and Dexter Fowler, the Cubs got off to a hot start in the NL Central and never looked back. The offensive production was at the top of the league with a lineup filled from top to bottom. Anthony Rizzo had yet another all-star season, and Kris Bryant solidified himself as one of the best third basemen in baseball, putting up a 7.9 wins above replacement in just his second year in the league and winning National League MVP. While the young core of the Cubs was built around offense, the pitching staff really held its own. John Lester and Kyle Hendricks both had Cy Young caliber seasons at the top of the rotation, and Madden managed bullpen matchups well. The trade deadline additions of Aroldis Chapman, Joe Smith, and Mike Montgomery boosted the bullpen's overall efficiency. Without much competition in the Central, the Cubs cruised to a 103-58 record and finished as the top seed in the National League. Into the playoffs, the Cubs continued their role, advancing past the Giants in the NLDS and then the Dodgers in the NLCS. This would bring the Cubs to their historic World Series matchup against the Cleveland Indians. While the Cubs were favored to win the series, their offense was shut down in games 1, 2, and 4, and Chicago found themselves facing a 3-1 deficit. But after a 3-run fourth in Game 5 and an offensive explosion in Game 6, the Cubs had tied the series up. After a crazy back-and-forth Game 7, the Cubs had taken the lead in the top of the 10th and won their first World Series title in 108 years. The Cubs' World Series win in 2016 was historic, and it really said a lot about the future direction of the franchise. In their 108-year drought, the Cubs did have some unfortunate circumstances and just straight-up bad luck, but during that time period, there were a lot of times where the franchise settled and didn't put their best foot forward to compete for a title. With the rebuild that led up to the 2016 run, not only did the Cubs have a clear direction, but they also built a team that even after winning the World Series, looked like they still had their best years ahead of them. In 2017, the Cubs were still a good team, but they became far more inconsistent compared to the season prior. The offense was still top 5 in the league, even though some of the veterans they acquired along the way started to decline, but it was the pitching staff that took some serious steps back. Luckily for the Cubs, they were still able to come out of the NL Central without much competition, and they even squeaked past the Nationals in the NLDS. But in the NLCS against a much improved Dodgers team, the Cubs' inconsistencies showed on both sides of the ball, and they were eliminated in 5 games. And even if they didn't know it at the time, this would be the beginning of the end for the Joe Madden Cubs. Over the next 2 seasons, we would see the Cubs slowly decline right before our very eyes. In 2018, the 8 new pitching additions to the roster added minimal improvement to the staff, and the Cubs were eliminated in the wildcard game against the Rockies. And in 2019, without any real impact additions to the roster besides half a season of Nick Castellanos, the Cubs missed the playoffs for the first time since 2015, which was enough for the front office to decide to move on from Joe Madden. Madden is arguably the best manager in Cubs history. I mean, how many managers can say they led the Cubs to a World Series title? I can answer that. There's 2 of them, and one of them is Joe Madden. But he still had his faults. And according to Theo Epstein, Madden leaving Chicago came down to a lack of motivation and players not playing to what the front office saw as their full potential. saying that we all feel we could put a little bit more emphasis on work, especially working together as a team, on pushing limits to be the very best versions of themselves, and getting away from some of the routines that have proven successful individually, because there's another level that we can all get to. While Madden not motivating his players enough or creating the right clubhouse culture was the public reasoning for the team's inability to reach their full potential, to place the blame on Joe Madden entirely would just be asinine. 9 years ago, when Theo Epstein described his vision for the Cubs being a drafting and development powerhouse to maintain their success, it was something a lot easier back then than it is now. The Cubs were in last place for 5 straight seasons until 2015, which, in result, left the team with a lot of top draft picks. And while the Cubs' strategy of drafting position players and figuring out pitching later allowed them to land some of their top stars, it also resulted in some indirect consequences that ended up financially binding the franchise. Throughout 8 different draft classes under Theo Epstein, 124 pitchers have been drafted, and only 7 of them have made it to the big leagues for any team. The Cubs' failure to draft and develop homegrown pitching talent meant that they had to look at other outlets for pitching. In free agency, they went after guys like John Lester, Tyler Chatwood, Yu Darvish, and Craig Kimbrell. And when that wasn't enough, the Cubs looked towards their already declining farm system. Gleyber Torres was traded to the Yankees for half a season of Aroldis Chapman, who the Cubs desperately needed, and Eloy Jimenez was traded to the South Side for starter Jose Quintana. With all of the new additions, including Jason Hayward's massive contract, the Cubs didn't want to spend any more in free agency to fill the holes on their roster. Ownership was content with the team they had and refused to go over the luxury tax despite increases in the Cubs' revenue. And when the Cubs really needed to make changes to their team in the 2018 and 2019 offseasons, they did nothing, leaving them with a roster of underperforming position players, which brings us to where we are today. Following another season where the Cubs were eliminated in the first round where the offense failed to show up again, the Cubs have some serious questions to answer on where they go next. 2020 was the start of the David Ross era, and we have only seen him manage in the 60-game 2020 season, but so far he has held his own. His bullpen rotation worked well, and unlike Madden, he kept his starting lineup pretty consistent, albeit a number of hitters in the lineup struggled to produce at the plate. At his end of 2020 season press conference, Theo Epstein mentioned that change is warranted and necessary for the Cubs going forward. This is something similar to what he said the last 2 years, so we will see if he means it this time. While Chicago is going to be competitive in 2021, I wouldn't expect them to be at the level of top-end contenders like the Dodgers or the Braves without significant changes. With Kris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, and Kyle Schwarber all becoming free agents following the 2021 season, over the next year, the Cubs will need to decide which of their core players to try and extend, let walk in free agency, and possibly trade. After down years, it is hard to determine what kind of trade value some of these players will have, but at this point, really anything would help the Cubs farm system. Even if Chicago is able to hang on to most of their core pieces after free agency, they will need to build back up their development system for another shot at the World Series. Although Epstein might be gone after the 2021 season, he knows that it is important for the Cubs to remain competitive in the present while building for the future, and make sure that the franchise keeps a proper direction so that the next World Series title isn't 108 years away. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Once again, I'd like to thank The Athletic for sponsoring this video. Make sure you guys check out the link in the description to get The Athletic for only $1. Yes, $1 a month. They have some of the best writers in the business like Ken Rosenthal and Jason Stark. I read it every single day. It is truly the best in sports writing, so make sure you check out the link in the description. But thanks again, everybody, and I will see you all soon.
I'm so sick of these games. Every single day it started feeling the same. Another goes by, guess I'm running late. It's so difficult when I have no idea what comes tomorrow.